The Flynn's keychain is back because today we have another Tron game to review, and that game is Tron Solar Sailor for your Intellivoice equipped Intellivision. Let's go ahead and take Tron Solar Sailor. Let's pop it in my Intellivoice equipped Intellivision and see how it holds up today. Let's go to the game.
Mattel Electronics presents Tron.
Tron Solar Sailor, which is spelled with an ER, not an OR, because it's named after the ship, not the person, was published by Mattel and released in 1983. It was both the last Tron game officially released for the Intellivision and the last officially released Intellivoice game. It was programmed by the late Keith Robinson, who helped keep the Intellivision name alive in the 1990s and beyond. It is based on the Disney cult favorite movie that came out the previous year. Although it is technically possible to play the game without an Intellivoice, it will be near impossible to beat since the voice will give you numeric passcodes needed to progress and beat the game. The manual opens with the following. Game is based on Tron, the Walt Disney Productions futuristic movie. You are the character Flynn. Your opponent is a tireless master control program. Your only hope of returning to the real world is to destroy the MCP before it destroys you. To do so, you must overload the MCP. In the opening game phase, your Solar Sailor will ride intersecting beams on your TV screen. Recognisers and cannon-firing tanks will attack the Solar Sailor on its way to the MCP and the decoding phase. In the second phase, you'll be involved with frantic decoding action inside the heart of the MCP. Tron Solar Sailor is a single-player game with one standard mode of difficulty. To start the game, you simply press the disc on the controller. The manual shows a picture that makes it look like that the game takes place on a circular disc with 7 tracks. Despite what it looks like on the picture, each track is the same length. Your goal is to start on track 7 on the outer edge and work your way to the MCP in the center. Each track contains 8 sectors numbered 0 through 8. You start the game in Sector 0. By moving right, you can advance sectors in numerical order. By moving left, you will go in descending order. So for instance, if you want to go to Sector 5 and you start on Sector 0, you'd want to go to the left for the shortest path possible. Each sector is separated by red boundary walls and has 4 horizontal beams, 2 that only go left and 2 that only go right, and 5 vertical beams, 2 that only go up, 2 that only go down, and a white I/O beam in the center. The controls aren't as complicated as other Intellivoice games, but the overlay can still be helpful when first learning the game. The upper side buttons are used to accelerate, and the bottom side buttons are used to brake. Numbers 1 through 6 on the keypad can be pressed to change beams, from the one you are riding on to the one you are approaching. Numbers 7 through 9 are used to leave the MCP in the second phase. The clear button can clear numbers you have pressed or give you verbal indication of the energy level of the beam you are on. Number 0 will give you a verbal indication of your location. The enter button is used to enter in codes and to show your score and overload factor. More on that later. The disc is used to aim and fire in the first phase and to go after numbers in the second phase. You begin the game on track 7, Sector 0. Before you start, you are given a sector goal and a 5-digit numeric code you will need to enter at the I/O beam at the sector goal in order to move closer to the MCP. You may want to write the code down as it doesn't repeat, and if you forget it, you'll need to return to the I/O beam in Sector 0 to get another one. The sector goal is always going to be located either at Sector 3, 4, or 5. If you get 3, you'll want to head to the right, and if you get 5, you'll want to move to the left for the shortest route possible. You start moving on a horizontal beam very slowly. To change beams, you need to hold down any number 1 through 6 before reaching the beam intersection. You can use accelerate to move faster, but to really get moving, you'll want to do a slingshot style maneuver, where you move in one direction on a horizontal beam, then switch to a vertical beam, then switch to a horizontal beam going in the opposite direction, and then hit the accelerate. This might sound complicated, but I found it easy to pick up on. Your health is tied to the beam you're on. When you get on a beam, you'll be told if the beam's energy level is high, medium, or low. The beam loses energy whenever you're hit or you fire. You are told when the beam's energy goes from high to medium or medium to low. It usually takes about 3 hits to go down a level. When a low beam is almost completely drained of energy, you'll be verbally warned to leave that beam. If you are on the beam when it runs out of energy, your game ends. Outside the beams are harmless sector bugs and tanks that can fire at you. You can fire at them by holding the disc down in the direction you want to fire, but you can only have 2 shots on screen at a time. The manual says that the more sector bugs around the beam, the more energy the beam has, but personally I paid more attention to the voices. You cannot switch to the white I/O beam, but when you approach the I/O beam in the goal sector, the game will freeze, giving you a chance to enter a 5-digit code you were given at the beginning of the track, using the numbers on the keypad and the enter button once entered. If you make a mistake, you can hit the clear button to erase all the numbers as long as you haven't pressed enter yet. If you enter the wrong code, you will go back to writing on the beam you were on, although you can circle back and try entering the code again when you approach the I/O beam a second time. If you enter the right code, you will ride on the I/O beam, advancing 2 tracks closer to the MCP. So if you're on track 7, you'll go to track 5, and if you're on track 3, you'll go to track 1. However, if you are on track 2, you'll only advance 1 track to track 1. Once you go to your new track, you will be given a new sector goal and access code. Starting on track 5, recognizers will begin to show up. To get rid of them, you either have to shoot them or switch beams and hope they don't follow. If one catches you, they will take you back either 1 or 2 tracks, dropping you in a random sector. Pressing the location button once dropped off is a good idea, as you'll need to go to the I/O beam in Sector 0 to get a new access code. Previous codes won't work even if you visited the track before. The difficulty can increase as you progress closer to the MCP. If you manage to reach and insert the correct access code at the I/O beam in the goal sector on track 1, you'll face the MCP himself. Here you move Bit around with the disc. Your goal is to overload the MCP by inserting enough correct override codes. You'll be told an 8-digit code comprised of 1s and 0s. During this phase, white and yellow 1s and 0s will fly at you. You can catch a number when Bit touches it. When you catch a yellow number, it will automatically go into your code below, but not always in the correct spot. If it is in an incorrect spot, you will need to replace it by catching another number and putting it there. If you catch a white number, you can place it in one of the 8 spots below by pressing the numbers 1 through 8 on the keypad, with 1 putting the number in the leftmost spot and 8 for the rightmost spot. Throughout this time, when a number goes into a spot, Bit will say yes if the number goes in the correct spot, or no if it goes into an incorrect spot. Since your 8 digits on the bottom start with all 0s, you only really have to place the 1s unless a 1 gets put into the wrong spot. There's a hidden timer during this phase, so you want to fill the code as quick as you can. Throughout the game, you have not only been earning points, but you have also been working on an overload factor. When you press the score button, the game will freeze and show you your score first, then the overload factor. You will also see both during the second phase. Reaching an overload factor of 100 will allow you to overload the MCP. You start the game with 50 overload points. During the first phase, your overload factor is increased by 5 points every time you enter a track for the first time, but it also decreases by 5 points when a recognizer sends you back. During the second phase, you gain 10 overload points when you insert the correct override code. But if you don't enter the code before the timer goes out, you lose 10 overload points. As long as you have some overload points left, you can continue, even if you don't input a code correctly in time. Going down to 0 overload points will end your game. Once you reach 100 overload points, the border will turn red. Once it turns red, you can press 8 to leave the MCP. 7 and 9 might also work too, but I stuck with the number 8. Leaving the MCP when the border turns red wins you the game, or you can decide to ignore it and keep on playing to increase your score. Scoring-wise, during Phase 1, you earn various points that depend on what you shoot and which track you are on at the time. During Phase 2, you get 250 points for entering a correct digit into the code, and 5,000 points for completing a code correctly, and those values double once you reach an overload factor of 100 and the border turns red. When you leave the MCP after the border turns red, you win the game and earn 50,000 extra bonus points. Graphically speaking, this is a solid-looking game with a neat 3D-looking second phase, although the grid background can be a minor eye strain after a while depending on the colors. Sound and music-wise, the game features some really great Tron music in the background. I also like the voice work.
43938.
We've been hit! Get off! Get off! Energy high!
You will regret this. Override code 10011010. I can't allow this.
Yes!
Family-friendly wise, the game would most likely get an E for everyone rating if it was released today. Although when the MCP says he can't allow it, some people hear him saying a vulgar word due to his accent. Currently at PriceCharting.com, the game has a value of $8 loose, $24 complete, and $36 new. So what do I think of Tron Solar Sailor? This game drove me crazy. Let's see, where do I start? First of all, unless you have an amazing memory, you're going to need to keep a pencil and paper nearby to record all the codes. And personally, I don't like having to use paper and pencil so much when playing a video game. Accelerating to a decent speed is way more complicated than it needs to be. The controls are also just not responsive enough. When I first played the game, I got so frustrated when I tried to change beams, but my button press didn't register. So I started button mashing the next time, still missed my turn, but then I take the next turn to my surprise. Finally, I discovered that by firmly pressing and releasing the button about a second before the intersection worked the best. Likewise, shooting the recognizers can also be a pain. You have to hold the disc a second before it fires, and firing at diagonals is tough. And sometimes if the recognizer was nearby, my shot would go right through it and I would get picked up. Joy. And let me tell you, it is super frustrating to be near your goal, only to be picked up by a recognizer, sent back a track or two, having to go all the way to Sector 0 to get another code, then try to go back to the new goal sector, only for another recognizer to pick you up and have to do even more backtracking. It's enough to make me want to gravitar my controller by throwing it against the wall. It's a good thing that the original Intellivision controllers are secured to the system so well. I even heard of some gamers who spend well over an hour on the first phase never making it to the second phase, and based on my time with the game, I believe it. I will say I appreciate the voices and the music, as well as the setup of the game. It's just that the execution falls flat. If the controls were better, this could have been a game I could have recommended, and I did get a feeling of satisfaction when I finally completed the game, but at the same time, it's not a game that I really want to revisit again in the future. So where am I going to rank Tron Solar Sailor? This game is going to the lower portion of my rankings. I do like Turbo more at 44, but I will put this over Space Hawk at 45. So out of the 53 games I'm now ranked for the Intellivision, Tron Solar Sailor is being picked up by a recognizer and dropped off at the 45 position. Tron Solar Sailor has an interesting setup along with some cool music and voices, but you'll have to fight with the controls too much for me to really recommend it. But that is just my opinion. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Also, please like, share, and subscribe. Follow me both on the Facebook and the Twitter, and click the bell so you don't miss any future videos. At this time, I'd like to thank Rick from the Intellivisionaries podcast for supporting the show on Patreon. If you would like to sign up to support the show and gain access to exclusive perks, please go to patreon.com/NoSwearGamer. I also want to thank both Rick and fellow Intellivisionary host Paul for the work they did covering the game on their podcast. The manual is lacking, and their podcast helped me better understand the game when I was working on this review. Thank you for giving me a little part of your day, and I look forward to seeing you next time on the next episode of the No Swear Gamer. Take care, and remember, if you're going to play a futuristic game of Tron Solar Sailor, you'll need to remember your pencil and paper.
Yes! We've been hit!
End of line.